It was prime time, a major network, millions watching live. The host was infamous for her gotcha moments, especially with conservative guests. She had built her career on ambush-style interviews, carefully crafting questions designed to trap her opponents. And tonight, she thought she had the perfect opportunity, an interview with Donald Trump. Her team had spent weeks preparing, gathering every possible angle to attack Trump's family values, his marriage, and his character. She believed this would be the moment she finally took him down, exposing him in front of a national audience. As the cameras started rolling, Trump sat calmly in his chair, his expression unreadable. The host wore her signature fake smile, the kind media elites used when they believed they were about to destroy someone's reputation. 3, 2, 1. Live. What happened next would not only shatter her career but also serve as a powerful reminder of what real family values look like. And it all began with what seemed like an innocent question. "Mr. Trump," the host began, her tone syrupy sweet. "You've built an empire, become president, influenced millions. Would you say you're just lucky?" She delivered the question with that carefully rehearsed smile, the kind that made you wonder what was really lurking behind it. But Trump had seen this game before. Start soft, then twist the knife. He leaned forward slightly, a mix of confidence and amusement on his face. "You know, it's interesting that you ask that," Trump said, his voice steady and measured. "Liberals love that word, lucky. They use it to diminish success, to suggest that hard work and sacrifice don't matter. But let me tell you something about luck." He let the silence hang for a beat, drawing the audience in. "Luck doesn't build skyscrapers. Luck doesn't create thousands of jobs, and luck certainly doesn't make America great." The host's smile tightened just a fraction. This wasn't the defensive response she had hoped for, but she pressed on. "So you're saying everything you've achieved is purely through hard work?" "I'm saying," Trump replied, his voice gaining intensity, "that success comes to those who earn it. Yes, I've been blessed. But I've also worked harder than most people can imagine. I've had nights where I didn't sleep, deals that seemed impossible, challenges that would have broken many others." Then, he added something unexpected. "But here's what really matters. I've never done it alone." The host's eyebrows lifted slightly. There it was, the opening she had been waiting for. She was sure she had found the crack in his armor. "Not alone?" she asked, feigning curiosity. "Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the people behind Donald Trump." She was leading him exactly where she wanted, toward his marriage. "Of course," Trump continued. "When you mention the people behind me, you're probably thinking of my business partners, my advisors." He paused for effect. "But let me tell you who really deserves the credit. My family. Particularly Melania." The host's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Like a predator sensing weakness, she believed she had him cornered. "Ah, yes, Melania," she said, her voice dripping with calculated charm. "You know, many people wonder about her role in all of this. Some say she's rather quiet for such a powerful man's wife." Trump's eyes narrowed slightly. The air in the studio grew thick with tension. "Quiet? No," he corrected. "Dignified? Yes. There's a big difference, though I understand why some in the media might not grasp that concept." A nervous titter rippled through the audience. The host shifted in her chair, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. But she pressed on, her tone taking on a concerned air that fooled no one. "Well, what I mean is, we rarely hear from her, unlike other political wives who are very visible. Don't you think the public deserves to know more about the woman behind Donald Trump?" Trump didn't hesitate. His voice carried a mix of pride and protective steel. "The public," he said, "knows exactly what they need to know about Melania. She's brilliant, accomplished, and she chooses her moments carefully, unlike some who feel the need to fill every silence with noise. The audience murmured in approval. The host's practiced smile faltered for a moment. Her usual tactics weren't working. Instead of backing off, she decided to push even harder. "Let's talk about those accomplishments," she said, her tone shifting to something sharper. "Because some people say, well, they wonder if her main achievement isn't simply being Mrs. Donald Trump." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trump's expression hardened. Even the cameramen exchanged glances. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about moments in television history. Trump leaned forward slightly, his voice deadly calm. "Let me be very clear about something," he said. "Since you want to talk about achievements, let's talk facts." The studio was silent. Melania speaks 5 languages fluently. She built her own successful career. She has represented our country with more grace and dignity than any first lady in recent memory. The host swallowed, but Trump wasn't done. "But you wouldn't know about that, would you?" he continued, "because the mainstream media is too busy pushing their own narrative." The audience erupted in scattered applause. The host's face paled slightly. She was losing control, but she refused to give up. "Of course, Mr. Trump," she said quickly, "but don't you think that being married to you has opened certain doors for her?" Trump chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's interesting about that question?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "It shows exactly what's wrong with how some people think." The host blinked, not expecting that response. "Success isn't about doors being opened," Trump continued. "It's about what you do once you're in the room. And Melania? She doesn't just walk through doors. She transforms every room she enters." The audience broke into applause again. The host's face flushed slightly as she realized her narrative was crumbling. But she had one more card to play. She just didn't know that it would cost her everything. The host was cornered, but she wasn't about to admit defeat. She had prepared for this, expecting Trump to fight back, but now she needed a way to spin the conversation in her favor. She glanced at her notes, quickly scanning for something, anything that could change the momentum. And then she saw it. A carefully crafted question designed to provoke. She straightened in her chair, forcing another smile. "Well, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone shifting back to its artificially pleasant cadence, "since we're talking about family and values, let's discuss your past." The audience grew quiet. Trump simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. "You've been married multiple times," the host continued, her voice gaining a sharper edge. "Some would say that doesn't exactly align with traditional values, wouldn't you agree?" There it was. The trap. The host was banking on Trump stumbling, on him becoming defensive or perhaps even angry. But Trump didn't take the bait. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "You know," he began, "I always find it interesting when the media suddenly cares about traditional values, especially when they don't seem to hold their own political heroes to the same standard." The audience murmured. The host's lips tightened slightly. She hadn't expected him to go on the offense so quickly. "But since you brought it up," Trump continued, his tone measured, "let's actually talk about family values. Let's talk about what really matters." The host nodded slightly, urging him to continue, still convinced she could control the conversation. "See, family values aren't about perfection," Trump said. "They're about loyalty. They're about being there for your children. They're about supporting your spouse." The host opened her mouth to interject, but Trump didn't let her. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "Everyone has. But you know what I've never done? I've never abandoned my kids. I've never stopped providing for my family. And I've certainly never pretended to be something I'm not." The audience clapped again, louder this time. The host's jaw tightened. She had to regain control. "But don't you think," she interjected, raising her voice slightly to overpower the applause, "that someone who truly values family wouldn't have gone through multiple marriages in the first place?" Trump chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's cute," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "But let me ask you something. Since we're suddenly so concerned with relationships—" The host hesitated. Trump turned slightly, looking her dead in the eye. "You've been married, haven't you?" The audience tensed. The host's expression flickered just for a moment before she recovered. "Yes, of course. And divorced," Trump added smoothly. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. The host's face paled. "That's personal," she stammered. Trump tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Oh, is it? I thought we were talking about family values," he said. "Or is it only fair game when it's about me?" The audience gasped. A few people even laughed. The host's cheeks flushed as she struggled to regain composure. "I'm here to ask the questions," she said, her voice tight. Trump smirked. "Of course you are," he said, "because it's easy to judge someone else's life when yours isn't under the microscope." The audience clapped again. The host shifted uncomfortably, but she wasn't ready to surrender. She had one more card to play. She took a deep breath and forced another smile. "Well, Mr. Trump," she said, "since you value family so much, let's talk about someone very important. Your son, Barron." The room went silent. The air in the studio changed. She had crossed a line, and she knew it, but she wasn't prepared for what would happen next. The second the host mentioned Barron, the entire energy in the studio shifted. Even the audience, which had been murmuring and reacting throughout, fell silent. Everyone knew that going after Trump's policies, his businesses, or even his past was standard practice. But bringing his son into it? That was dangerous ground. Trump's expression didn't change immediately. He simply sat there watching the host, letting the weight of what she had just done settle over the room. The host, sensing the tension, pressed forward, trying to act as though she hadn't just made a serious mistake. "You've been very vocal about your love for your family," she continued, her tone attempting to sound measured. "But critics have pointed out that you've kept Barron largely out of the spotlight. Some wonder if that's because—" She never got to finish her sentence. Trump leaned forward, cutting her off with a look so sharp, so intense, that even the cameras seemed to freeze. "Stop," he said, his voice low and firm. The host blinked, caught off guard. Trump didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was something in his tone, something absolute, that sent a chill through the room. "You can come after me," he continued, his voice controlled but laced with warning. "You can attack my policies, my business, my marriage, whatever you want, but you do not bring my son into this." The host hesitated, clearly realizing she had overplayed her hand. But instead of backing off, she attempted to justify herself. "I wasn't attacking him, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost defensive. "I was simply asking—" Trump cut her off again. "No, you weren't," he said. "You were trying to use him, just like the media always does. You people have no boundaries." The audience clapped, and this time, it wasn't just support. It was approval. The kind of approval that signaled they were fed up with the media's tactics. The host shifted in her seat, realizing that this wasn't going the way she had planned. "I just think people deserve to know—" "People deserve a media that respects families," Trump shot back, "not one that drags innocent children into political games. Tell me something. Would you ask this question about a Democrat's child?" The host opened her mouth, but no words came out. Trump smirked. He had her. "Exactly," he said, "because we both know the answer." The audience erupted into applause, and for the first time that night, the host looked genuinely shaken. She shuffled her notes, trying to find something, anything, to pivot the conversation away from this disaster. But Trump wasn't done. "You know what's really sad?" he continued. "You sit here pretending to be a journalist, pretending to have real conversations. But all you're doing is trying to create controversy. You don't actually care about the truth. You don't care about fairness. And you certainly don't care about family values." The host swallowed hard, clearly trying to maintain composure. This is a conversation about public figures and transparency, she tried to argue. That's all. Trump shook his head. No, he said. It's a conversation about decency, and you just proved that you and your network have none. The audience roared in agreement. The host looked toward her producer, desperate for some kind of rescue. But there was none coming. She had walked straight into a disaster of her own making, and Trump was about to seal it. The host sat frozen, her carefully rehearsed poise unraveling before millions of viewers. The studio air felt thick, heavy with the realization that she had stepped into territory she was never prepared to defend. Trump leaned back slightly, exuding the confidence of a man who had just won the moment. He could have stopped there. He had already turned the tables, exposing the media's hypocrisy in real time. But he wasn't done. This is exactly why Americans don't trust the media, he continued, his voice calm but carrying the weight of finality. Because instead of real journalism, we get cheap shots and personal attacks. You sit here acting like you're asking tough questions, but what you're really doing is pushing an agenda. The host's face was unreadable now, but her silence spoke louder than any comeback she could have mustered. You wanted a viral moment, Trump said, smirking. Congratulations, you got one, but not the one you were hoping for. The audience clapped, some even standing. The reaction was no longer just about Trump's defense. It was about something bigger, a growing frustration with the way the media played its game. The host scrambled for control. Well, Mr. Trump, we've certainly covered a lot tonight, she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. But surely you can acknowledge that the press has a responsibility to ask difficult questions? Sure, Trump said. Difficult questions, not dishonest ones. The host flinched, but Trump wasn't waiting for a response. You see, the problem isn't tough interviews. I've dealt with those my whole life. The problem is when the media pretends to be objective while pushing a narrative. If you actually cared about tough questions, you'd be asking politicians on both sides the same things. But you don't. And that's why people don't respect the press anymore. The audience broke into another wave of applause. The host's producer was now wildly signaling for a commercial break, desperate to escape the train wreck unfolding live on air. But Trump wasn't done. You sit here trying to embarrass me, to twist my words, to create a headline, Trump continued. But what you've really done is prove exactly why I win. Because people are tired of this. They're tired of fake smiles, loaded questions, and media hit jobs disguised as journalism. The host opened her mouth to respond, but Trump raised a hand, stopping her cold. And one more thing, he said, leaning forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to command total attention. I stand by my family, I stand by my wife, and I stand by my son, no matter how many people like you try to tear us down. The room erupted. The standing ovation wasn't just for Trump, it was for the message, a message that resonated far beyond the cameras, beyond the studio, beyond the network that had just realized it had made a massive mistake. The host, her face drained of confidence, muttered something about taking a quick break. But it didn't matter anymore. The moment was sealed. Within hours, clips of the interview would flood social media. Headlines would scramble to spin the disaster into something salvageable. But the truth was clear. She had come for Trump, and instead, she had destroyed herself.